But first, this week, climate activists held Sydney hostage and caused commuter chaos by blocking key motorways and trapping people in their cars for hours.
The aim was to cause mass disruption, and it worked.
The traffic bedlam was thanks to a climate change protester who blocked the harbour tunnel with her car, sparking outrage from some motorists.
They're throwing down milk crates, they're throwing down roadwork material. I've even seen in one circumstance them throwing down slabs of concrete, narrowly missing police officers' feet. I tell you what, these police have their job cut out for them. It is dangerous work.
11 people taken into custody. The Premier not impressed.
These people are bloody idiots.
Well, the activist group responsible was Blockade Australia, and for the most part, the media was justifiably tough on these selfish activists. Think about all the people stuck in traffic, how many people missed hospital appointments, job interviews, or catch-ups with their elderly relatives. Now, let's be very clear. These illegal protests, which included one idiot chaining herself to her steering wheel, this is a crime which can result in tens of thousands of dollars in fines or jail time because it is dangerous, disruptive, and achieves absolutely nothing. But on the ABC, these protests were framed in a very different light. Unlike their coverage of COVID-19 protests, in this case it was the heavy-handed police who set the tone for the protests being too aggressive.
The moment they began to occupy a street here in the CBD, about 12 riot police came screaming in, pushing protesters to the sidewalk. The media also got caught up in that police response, and it really did set the tone for the next 40 minutes.
Police have been using very, very heavy-handed tactics on Blockade Australia in the lead-up to this protest.
Taking a pragmatic approach, could this rather heavy-handedness backfire? Will it only trigger more protests? I mean, certainly from speaking to Jay, he doesn't sound perturbed in the slightest when it comes to more types of penalties or infringements because he's committed to a cause he believes in.
Just an interesting side note I want to ask you about the protest action this week, because it's been noted, I've just been reading, the young woman who blocked the Harbour Tunnel in Sydney yesterday was a resident of Lismore, and of course a town a few months ago experiencing record floods, a town that's certainly still rebuilding. Do you think knowing that information changes the public's perception on her environmental activism?
Well, I mean, I suppose I'm not in a position to know what the public thinks so quickly, but certainly, I mean, Lismore's been...
But it puts it into context, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, what a disgraceful attempt by the ABC to blame our hard-working cops who spent the week dealing with these intellectually deficient activists after they caused Australia's largest city to grind to a halt. And when you heard the ABC report on the global anger people felt after they were locked in their homes because of COVID-19 measures, these people were categorised as being, quote, far right. Like on this segment the ABC uploaded to YouTube in November last year, the ABC wrote, tens of thousands of protesters, many from far-right groups, march in Austria and other European nations as COVID-19 restrictions tighten. But when people are breaking the law because of a perceived environmental cause, this is what the ABC reports.
Just who are Blockade Australia?
Well, they're a climate action group. Their message is that we need to act faster on climate change issues.
Wrong. These are anarchists who don't care about anything other than tearing down the systems which make our country so successful. They don't come with solutions, only extreme threats. And if you don't believe me, listen to what they have to say themselves.
Fighting against the colonial Australian system.
Do you have anything to say to the commuters this morning, sir?
Australian colonial system will kill us all if we let it.
Blockade Australia says it won't stop.
They're going to continue throughout the week,
saying ordinary citizens are the target because society must be transformed.
Yeah, that's a big part of the reason.
Well, joining me now to cut through the big news stories of the week is media writer at The Australian, Sophie Ellsworth, and of course commentator Daisy Cousins. Daisy, why don't we start with you? These protests in Sydney, they caused a lot of people headaches, but from what I got from it as well is people have real legitimate things to do, such as attending hospital appointments or visiting elderly folk. And from my point of view, the ABC to water down the significance of what these protesters did, I found quite unconscionable.
Yeah, it was pretty appalling. I was sort of stunned to hear the sort of blasé way they reported on this. I mean, for a protester to literally block the harbour tunnel with her car, that is so unbelievably dangerous. It puts her in danger, it puts the commuters in danger, it puts the cops in danger, let alone, everything you've said about people missing hospital appointments and job interviews, etc. And of course, the protesters won't care about this because their whole thing is that protests are meant to disrupt. So as you say, they are anarchists. The more disruption that is done to the city, the better. They just want to tear down the system. But look, my question for them, Jack, is what are they still protesting for? I mean, the election has happened, and it seems to me they got all or most of the things that they wanted. I mean, the coalition government was defeated. The Greens did really well. Labor got in and has, promised these outrageous climate targets. They got a bunch of Tealy independents in who are lobbying for even more hardcore climate targets. The Greens did very well in the Senate, so they'll be able to probably push Labor on a couple of climate-related things. These are all the boxes they apparently wanted ticked a couple of years ago. Now it's happened, and they are still blocking the harbour tunnel, and they are still doing dangerous things, and they are still yelling and screaming, and the ABC is still reporting on them in this sort of glowing, lovely kind of light, despite the damage that they are causing. So I'm just thinking to myself, do these activists want blood? Like, what more do they want? Are they really here for their climate cause? Do they really believe that the Labor government can literally change the weather in Lismore? I don't know, but either way, this is getting a bit much.
It's such a good point. It's a big problem that Labor faces moving forward. They obviously utilised a lot of the anger against the coalition to get elected, but now they've got these very radical people that want 100% cuts in a very short amount of time. Sophie, from a media coverage point of view, I found it very interesting that the ABC now wants to understand the psyche of the protesters. And this, to me, is in stark contrast to how they reported the protests in your home state, in Victoria. What have you made of that comparison?
Well, it feels to me, Jack, like the ABC are being apologists for these climate activists who are clearly disrupting people's lives, as we saw in Sydney this week. Now, the ABC has a charter to abide by, and that is to be neutral and impartial in its reporting, but they seem to be sympathetic to the cause. So it appears to me, depending on the cause you're fighting for, it results in how the ABC covered the story. Now, as you showed in that clip there, some of the explanations or descriptions of protesters last year in the COVID lockdowns were far-right extremists by the public broadcaster. And I think that the fact that they're giving so much oxygen to these climate activists really feeds into that narrative that the ABC continue to push, this climate alarmism, this climate concern. And look, Jack, I'll be really interested to see how the media cover the next major flood we have, or cyclone, or bushfire, because the coalition has been largely blamed for this by the media, and now they won't be able to do that anymore. So I think the media are letting themselves down, particularly the public broadcaster, by taking a team here. They shouldn't have a dog in the race, Jack. They should be sitting on the fence.
I agree. And Daisy, I want to get you to respond to something Sophie said that was very interesting. It's obviously the motivations are important in these situations. I personally think that we should want to know the motivations for anyone protesting, but it was different to how they covered the COVID rallies. And there was one ABC presenter that suggested, well, one of the protesters was from the part of New South Wales which was hit by flooding. Is there a justification? Does that mean that this is okay? I mean, I find that quite absurd when these protests are having police officers with concrete slabs thrown at them. It doesn't seem like there should be a justification for that kind of violence.
No, there should never be a justification for that kind of violence. Absolutely, I don't care if the girl is from Lismore. And again, does she really think that the government can change the weather? Is the new government going to change the weather in Lismore with our tiny, paltry little 1.3% that Australia actually contributes to global emissions? I don't think so. It's a ridiculous premise that she's working under, and shame on the ABC for trying to push that as some sort of justification. And as for the way that the ABC treated the anti-lockdown protests last year, I mean, we are absolutely looking at chalk and cheese here. Those lockdown protesters, they were called Nazis, they were called far right, and it is really interesting. You can see here the difference between a protest that is genuinely anti-government and a threat to the establishment, and a protest that is not actually anti the establishment or really anti-government. The way that the media, particularly the ABC, is pandering to the climate action protesters, and, you know, Dominic Perrottet came out and called them, you know, idiots, and said a little bit of stuff about them, should, you know, indicate to us all that really those kind of climate protests, they are well within the kind of stuff that the government is, you know, that kind of ideology the governments are happy to pander to, and so is the media. Whereas the anti-lockdown protests, the outrage and the anger that the government reacted, and certainly the media did, should indicate that those were the genuinely anti-government, anti-establishment protests. You can always tell by the way the media treats them. So that the sheer hypocrisy of the ABC here, pandering to their pet little cause with people that put so many people in danger, cops, civilians, themselves, everyone, to the way they screamed about people who, and again, while I'm not encouraging anyone to break the law, protest or not for any reason, by the way, but people who were really speaking truth to power and sticking it to the man and protesting for people's genuine freedoms. It's just extraordinary.
Yeah, no, well said, Daisy.